So we have been going through a series on the spirit of Jezebel, and I believe the reason why God has laid it upon my heart to cover this series is because we're having such a battle out there with this spirit today, and we've taken several weeks to describe all the dynamics. And we got to ask ourselves, who is Jezebel? And the name in the Hebrew is Jezebel, which probably means where is the prince? And that is a special meaning because it is a ritual question spoken in ceremonies honoring Baal. Remember, the prime deity in Sidonia and Phoenicia was Baal. And so when they would gather for worship, they would ask, so where is the prince? It was an invocation to bring in the spirit of Baal into their midst in their worship services. But it also means not exalted. And so in the Hebrew, when the Masoretes put in the vowels, because you remember, in ancient Hebrew, they had no vowels. But when the Masoretes put in the vowels about 1,000 years ago, they adjusted the meaning a little to say that Isabel or Jezebel was not exalted. In other words, she is like the dung that God made her out to be when she died. And so it was a condemnation. It was a polemic against her. So they've actually changed her name. So when we say Jezebel, she is not exalted. And that's something that I think we really, really need to understand, beloved. That although we have spent a couple weeks talking about how powerful the Jezebel spirit is, what is the one thing we always have to remind ourselves? That spirit is not God. It is a created being. As a matter of fact, it's not even Lucifer. It's not even Satan. It is not that powerful. So although it is powerful, we also understand that God has already given us the victory if we have the victory according to his ways. Do not be afraid. What was it that God said to Joshua? Don't be afraid. What was it that the people said to Joshua? Don't be afraid. What does God say to us? Be anxious for nothing, but in everything in prayer and supplication, make your requests known unto God. And the peace, the shalom of God that passes all understanding, even when you've got a storm going around you, that our hearts and minds will be guarded in Messiah Yeshua. There will be peace. All right. So, but we do need to, again, kind of review what it is that we understand about the spirit of Jezebel. The spirit of Jezebel is powerful. In all probability, it's not just a demon, which is a dispossessed spirit of a Nephilim, but actually a fallen angel, a watcher itself. And so these are very powerful. What else do we know about the spirit of Jezebel? It is evil. It is completely given over to evil, which means that it is our enemy through and through. There's no negotiating with it. There is no compromise. It is all out war. When that spirit comes in, it comes in to destroy, and it will destroy everything in its path. It will destroy individuals. It will destroy relationships. It will destroy families. It will destroy congregations. It will destroy cities. It will destroy countries if given permission to do so. It is murderous, and it especially goes after the prophets and those who are spiritual warriors. So if you have a prophetic gifting, and God is raising up the prophets, okay? I don't know about you, but I have seen all kinds of people who today have the Lord speaking to them in profound ways. My wife is one of them. God has entered her into a prophetic ministry, which she did not have before. And he is now speaking to her and calling her to be a prophetic voice in this day. And the spirit of Jezebel will go after those, and also those who are trained in spiritual warfare. I had a very interesting encounter this past week. I went to a Christian business person's breakfast, men and women. And after the breakfast was over, I got into a conversation with a young man who was intrigued about what a Messianic Jew was, but at the end of the conversation, he actually tells me that he was a Freemason and wanted me to come to the lodge to explain my perspective on the temple, because of course the Solomon's Temple is huge in Freemasonry. They're coming right up to me and saying, "Hey, how you doing? Would you like to join us?" I mean, that's in Yiddish we call that chutzpah. That's called that's called that's called. What's the word I'm looking for? It is chutzpah is nerve. Okay, I mean they're right out in the open, and so they are. They know that we have experience in dealing with the spirit of Freemasonry, and so they're coming right out and they're trying to recruit us. It's amazing. And why are they so powerful? Because the spirit of Jezebel will use witchcraft and occult power, very much steeped in it. And the more occultic you get, the more powerful the demons get, the more evil they are. They are rebellious against authority, especially male authority. What you will find now, a man or a woman can have a Jezebel spirit, and they will go in and they will overtake someone who is, charismatic, who is highly intelligent, and who has natural gifting, and then will go into undermine the God-given authority. And so what you will see a Jezebel spirit doing is they will attempt to take down the proper leadership in order to exalt themselves. And what they do with men is they emasculate men. In the Bible, we hear about eunuchs, and what eunuchs were men that were castrated, so they had the equipment removed, so that because why the male testicles produce testosterone, obviously, because that's the name. And testosterone is the main hormone that provides men with virility and also the ability to lead. Men are physically stronger than women, and one of the reasons is because they have more testosterone. Testosterone builds muscles, it builds strength. And when a man's testicles are removed, that means that they are emasculated so that they don't have the drive that most men had. Because can you imagine a king having someone look after his harem of women, and you've got a healthy male who is looking after them? What do you think is going to happen? When the cat's away, the mice will play. So when they would castrate the men in order that they would be safe with the women, because a man doesn't have sex drive when he doesn't have testicles, and he isn't so bent on power. You're not going to have a man who is going to be a warrior if he has been emasculated. So what the Jezebel spirit does is it spiritually emasculates men. And so you'll see where there's a strong influence of a Jezebel spirit, either in a family or a congregational context, that it's usually the women who are the stronger of the personalities because men aren't confident about their ability to lead. And you'll have the woman who is undermining him, or they had a domineering father or something like that, and the men don't feel confident. On the other hand, with women, a Jezebel spirit will attack a woman's identity as a mother, as a wife, as a protector. Now, men and women both have protector roles, but women, and I know Joe has often referred to herself as this, the mama bear. Okay, when you have the little chicks that are running around, and someone comes in and threatens them, mama bear rises up and says, "You come after my kid, you're going to be in big trouble." Yes, the cubs, right. Cubs, chicks, it all works together. Bears and chicks, and in the millennial kingdom, everybody's going to get along, so it's okay. So the bears, I'm sure, will be looking after the chicks. So you've got motherhood and the desire to make a home and to provide a safe and comfortable environment. That is the natural role of a woman. And a Jezebel spirit will come in and will undermine that. And the woman won't feel pretty enough. And there will be fear that will put into the woman, thinking that her husband's going to run off with someone because she doesn't somehow match up. And it creates all these insecurities. whatever technique that the Jezebel spirit will use will do so in order to bring destruction to the family unit. Because if you destroy the family unit, you destroy society. As we discussed last week, the Jezebel spirit often uses sexuality. It is promiscuous. It does not value the monogamous role that God made for men and women, the model that he set up. And so a femme fatale, as we talked about, will use sexuality in order to draw men. Because if you can get a male leader to commit sexual immorality, what's going to happen? He disqualifies himself from ministry, or at least should. And so you've got a powerful spirit here. But again, what does the scripture say? 1 John 4:4. Greater is he who is within us than he who is in this world. The Spirit of God that is within us has already defeated the Jezebel spirit, because Lucifer, Hallel, Satan, was defeated at the cross and all of his minions. And we see at the end that they're all going to be cast into the lake of fire. But in the meantime, we got to hold the fort. We got to battle right now. So how do we do that? How did God defeat this tyrant woman, Jezebel, in Israel? Because that will provide a model for us today. And how did he do it? He chose a man. He raised up a man in order to defeat this wicked spirit. Oh boy. And when you look at the character of Jehu, now, we know Jehu wasn't perfect. We're going to get into that. But he is what you would consider a model for a warrior king. And Yeshua is very much a warrior king. So although he was imperfect in so many ways, he is a picture of Messiah who is going to come back and lay waste to the enemy. Why did God choose Jehu? I mean, if we look at who Jehu was, he was a general in Ahab's army, and also served King Jehoram, who is his son. And he very specifically, as we read this earlier in the Haftorah portion, that God told Elijah to anoint Elisha as the replacement for him as a prophet. He told him to anoint Hazael to replace Ben-Hadad as king of Assyria, which seemed to be odd. I mean, why would God choose a pagan king? That just shows you God's in charge of everybody. But he also says that he was to anoint Jehu, or Yehu in the Hebrew, to replace Ahab and his household as king of Israel. And when Elisha told him, his servant, to go actually anoint Jehu, he anoints him and he says, this is what you're going to do. You are going to wipe out the line of Ahab. So in other words, God was telling him to commit rebellion against the household of Ahab, because God raised up Omri, who is Ahab's father, as king of Israel. Ahab replaced him, brought in Jezebel, led the nation into apostasy. His first son, Ahaziah, died quickly, and so Jehoram became the king. So you have now got the third generation of Ahab's dynasty. And God was saying to Jehu, you're going to be the one to annihilate. And why did God choose Jehu? What was Jehu's response when he was anointed? He said, he didn't even hesitate. He was a man of action. And what God is looking for in order to win any kind of spiritual battle, it's not just against the spirit of Jezebel, but in any kind of spiritual battle, is that he is looking for people of action. Jehu is very impulsive, but look what he did. He kills Joram. And this is just in one line. He gets anointed as king. He immediately secures the city so that no one can go tell Jehoram what is happening. Okay, he says, keep it silent. And then what does he do? He immediately goes off. He kills Joram, who is the physical power. He kills Ahaziah, who is the king of Judah. And why does he kill him? It wasn't just collateral damage, because Ahaziah was Ahab's grandson. So Ahab, through satanic influence, had the throne of both Israel and Judah. And he was, Ahaziah was Ahab's grandson through Athaliah, who was just Jehoram's, the son of Jehoshaphat. He was his wife. She was his wife. And so he kills him. He then kills Jezebel, who was the source of the evil. Then he kills Ahab's family and friends, so that you don't have the possibility of contamination of the line coming back. Because what does Paul say? A little leaven leavens the whole loaf. So that if you have a remnant of evil, why is it that they were told when they went into battle, Israel went into battle, they were told to kill all the males and all the women who had known a man? Because when a woman has sexual relationships with a man, she becomes one with him spiritually. And so she is now yoked with the man. But also the boys would grow up to take vengeance on their fathers. Only the girls who hadn't known a man could be assimilated into the new culture. A man or a woman who had known a man was not able to do so. And so by killing off all of the rest of his descendants, God was saying that I need to eliminate the stain, the spiritual stain that is in Ahab's lineage and dynasty from ever making a comeback. And then he eliminates Baal worshippers, which was the false religion in society. One guy did this. As a matter of fact, when Jehu calls the keepers of Ahab's children, he had 70 sons. So obviously Jezebel wasn't the only one, because I don't think a woman can have 70 kids, as far as I know. I don't know what went on back then, but I'm pretty sure that there was more than one wife, as all the kings had. So there were 70 sons, and Jehu says, okay, pick a champion. And those who were looking after Ahab sons in Israel, how are we going to stand again? Okay, we are back. Okay. Yeah. Due to technical difficulties, the invisible man will not be seen tonight. Yes. All right. So here is one man, King Joram, or King Jehu, and he kills the king of Israel. He kills the king of Judah. Then he goes on to kill Jezebel, and then he kills all of Ahab's family, and then he wipes out Baal worship in all of Israel. That was a truly profound line of work. And what was interesting, though, is that in Hosea chapter 1, verse 4, he's actually condemned for doing some of this stuff. It says that, and the Lord, in Hosea 1:4, and the Lord said to him, name him Jezreel, for yet a little while, and I will punish the house of Jehu for the bloodshed of Jezreel, and I will put an end to the kingdom of the house of Israel. On that day I will break the bow of Israel in the valley of Jezreel. Why would he be condemned? What was he condemned for? Well, what happened in the valley of Jezreel is when he destroyed the temple and the priests of Baal, and then all of Baal worship. And so he killed a lot of people that day. And so he eliminates false religion. Now, God hates Baal worship, but he wasn't specifically told to go do that. And so what Jehu did is he went beyond his mandate in his zeal for the Lord. And one of the reasons he might have been condemned for that through the prophet Hosea was because his zeal was self-centered. It was about his own legacy. It was about his own power. And so we have to be careful. This is what God has also said about the other nations. He says this in Isaiah, I think it's 47. He also says this in Zechariah chapter 1 about Babylon, the Chaldeans, that God was angry with Israel, and he appointed the Chaldeans in order to chastise them, but he says that they went too far. They were merciless in their destruction of Israel. And so then God went and turned around and went after them and destroyed them, actually, especially for judgment. When we become the rods of judgment for God, we got to be beyond. Because when you can see it with Jehu, I mean, power can be intoxicating. When you have a clear path to go and lay God, we got to be careful. And I think that's why Jehu was condemned in Hosea for that. In 2 Kings chapter 10, in verse 30 and 31, Jehu finishes wiping out everything. And so God seems to affirm him. And the Lord said to Jehu, because you have done well in executing what was right in my eyes, and have done to the house of Ahab according to all that was in my heart, your sons of the fourth generation shall sit on the throne of Israel. So God is commending him at this point for fulfilling his assignment. He wiped out Ahab's line. He is not commended here for wiping out Baal worship. So you can see that that is absent. Okay? But, and here is where Jehu was not faithful. But Jehu was careful not to walk in the law of the Lord, the God of Israel, with all his heart. And he did not depart from the sins of Jeroboam, which made Israel sin. So even though he was zealous for the Lord in order to wipe out Baal worship, because that was associated with Jezebel, he didn't depart from the golden calves that Jeroboam had built. So he wasn't truly worshiping the God of Israel. He was worshiping a corruption of it, his idea of it. And so there was a condemnation. And Hosea says that God was going to judge him and remove his family line. And so the fourth generation after Jehu, his son dies in a coup, but also during the reign of Jehu and his descendants, you see that you can see that Assyria begins to take parts of Israel. So Jehu had this wonderful opportunity. There was a clean slate that was available to them to go back to true worship of Yahweh, of the one true God, but he doesn't do it. He only goes part way. And this was a sin that a lot of the kings did, even in Judah, that although they brought about revival, the revival was limited, and they weren't able to completely bring back true worship. And it got to the point where even when you have someone like Josiah, who was as zealous for God as anybody, I mean, it says that there was no one like Josiah. He went through the entire land. He destroyed all the idols. He broke down all the altars, took down all the high places. But it said the hearts of the people were not yet turned back to God. And as soon as he died and his sons took over, they brought them right back into idolatry. So the sin of idolatry can get so seeped into our spiritual DNA that sometimes we reach the point of no return. And that's what God had to deal with in throwing Israel into captivity. Wow. Apparently the coffee is not working all that well today. All right. So again, who was Jehu? He was Ahab's general who God chose to be the executioner of Ahab's line. His name means Yahweh is he. So there is a biblical name there. And he was an outsider that was used to make snap decisions and strong enough to see it through. So even though a lot of what Jehu did, it was in his own strength, but he had the strength of character in order, when God told him, you're going to take out Ahab's line, he didn't question. He didn't even hesitate. He secured the city, make sure that there were no leaks. And, the president of the United States probably needs to take a couple lessons from him, because he's got leaks happening all the time. And he was known to be very impulsive. Jehu was your prototypical battering ram. He was a raging bull in a china shop. There was no subtlety about him. There was no compromise in him. He was all in. Anybody ever know anybody who was all in? Some of us have had children like that, where, you wave the red flag and they're off. And they charge. They go in with everything, and those are usually the kids that end up banging and bumping and bruising, and they get all kinds of. You got to put bubble wrap around them. And so, he was known for his maniacal driving. Okay, so as we read this morning, it said that when they put the watchman on the wall, and it says we see someone coming, and so they sent out the watchman. And one doesn't come back, and the second watchman, and he doesn't come back. And it says the driving looks like that of Jehu, the son of Nimshi, for he drives furiously. Anybody have a spouse like that, or a parent like that, where they drive all over the place, and they have a collection of speeding tickets in the wall and stuff like that they use as wallpaper and stuff like that. Though that's the type of person that Jehu was. And so God, in order to come against this, I want you to picture the spirit of Jezebel and the demonic spirit that had encompassed Israel like the walls of Jericho. And that as evil began to be practiced in society for decades, they built up this wall to prevent righteousness from coming in. And what God needed in order to break that wasn't negotiation. It wasn't like we said about Neville Chamberlain last week, who was the Prime Minister of England back in the late 30s, where he went to Berlin and had a meeting with Hitler, and he comes back and says, we have peace in our time, and 6 months later, World War II has broken out. Okay? Because the fortress of evil had been built up so much that God needed someone who drove furiously in order to break it down. It's almost as if Jehu was charging toward Ramoth Gilead, where Jehoram and Ahaziah was, but then he went to Samaria, and he went to confront the power source, which was Jezebel. Okay, there was no hesitation, there was no stopping, and too often, when we are in spiritual war, because remember, what is one of the techniques that the spirit of Jezebel uses? It's fear. It's fear. And Elijah, having this massive victory on Mount Carmel, kills 850 prophets. Can you imagine having one against 850 winning, and then having one person strike fear into your heart? But that's because now you're dealing with the principality. Now you're dealing with the source of all that. And the spirit of Jezebel is like a battering ram. When you're fighting against it, oh my goodness, it puts fear in your heart. You feel incapacitated. I remember 3 years ago in our congregation up in Peterborough, we had the same issue. We had a rebellion that was going on. And one person in particular, now that I've begun to think about it, I believe had the spirit of Jezebel. It was a man. And he had all the characteristics. He had, there were the problems with lust and things like that, and pornography, and there's all these other things. But whenever dealing with this particular man, and when you would confront him, there would be such a stomping. He actually used to stomp his feet like a little child. And it was a show of power. And he was a pretty big guy. He was well over 200 pounds, over 6 feet tall. And it was intimidating to deal with him. And, I mean, I have a lot of years of martial arts background, and yet spiritually there was this hesitation in dealing with it because he didn't want to have to come against that. And so what the spirit of Jezebel does is it uses fear to incapacitate authority, mainly male authority, because male is the natural headship that God has put in. Males are the ones that God is called to lead. And what does Jezebel do? She uses fear, or it's a spirit, uses fear in order to emasculate men, in order to incapacitate them and take away their rightful role as protectors of the family and the flock. And so Jehu needed to be without compromise and without even having time to think about it. He was impulsive. Now, impulsive people tend to drive us crazy because you never know what they're going to blow up. But when you're going into battle, you want someone who is resolute. You want someone who is resolute. George McClellan, who was a general for the Union Army under Abe Lincoln during the Civil War, Abe Lincoln said about him, if he can't fight himself, he excels in making others ready to fight. And so McClellan was a great organizer. He used to be able to train people. However, except the endless preparation was a form of procrastination, and when the chips were down, McClellan couldn't bring himself to go into battle. In 1862, the general hesitated and missed a great opportunity to capture Richmond, Virginia, from Robert E. Lee's men. Later that same year, he dilly-dallied both before and after the Battle of Antietam, squandering a 2-to-1 advantage over Lee. Some analysts say the delays made the war drag on by 3 extra years, and we know how many people died because of that. And Henry Halleck, who was another general in the Union Army, said, there is an immobility here that exceeds all that any men can conceive of. It requires the lever of Archimedes to move this inert mass. And so here you have a general that Lincoln had put in place. And Lincoln had a problem with a lot of generals. There were a lot of guys who just simply couldn't get the job done. And McClellan was most known for his procrastination. And so his philosophy of war was ready, aim, 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 not so ready, aim, aim, aim. Whereas Jehu was more like ready, shoot, aim, squirrel. I mean, it was just go. He would charge off, and there wasn't even any thinking about it. He got an assignment from the Lord. I want you to annihilate the family of Ahab. Well, if you've got an entire royal family entrenched in society, if you're going to take your time, that gives the enemy an opportunity to recalibrate, to plan a defense. But if you move so quickly that the enemy doesn't see it coming, the most effective strategy in battle is the element of surprise. If you can surprise your enemy and catch him off guard, then that gives you a much greater chance of victory. And so that is what we see with Jehu, that he was unequivocating in, God gives me this assignment. And it's interesting because there wasn't any hesitation, not only on his part, but on all his people, on all his, so the prophet goes and he anoints him king, and they're on an outpost at Ramoth Gilead. So they're defending, they're still in battle over the city, over Ramoth Gilead. And as soon as he says that, he's anointed me king, they said, Jehu is king. There wasn't even any hesitation. That's pretty remarkable, because what in effect they were saying was that we are going to participate in this rebellion. So what does that tell you? It tells you that the army was not behind Jehoram. They weren't in favor of his leadership. They were disillusioned with the lineage, the dynasty of Ahab in leading the country. And so when a man who they obviously respected was anointed king, they were fully behind him. That doesn't always happen. We see that happening previously, and actually Jezebel is going to reference it. We'll get to that in a minute. And yet, Isaiah 40:31 says, yet those who wait for the Lord will gain new strength. So we're talking about Jehu's impulsiveness and his prone to being active, but yet we always talk about waiting on the Lord. Isaiah 40:31, those who wait on the Lord will gain new strength. They will mount up on wings of eagles. They will run and not get tired. They will walk and not become weary. Patience is one of the fruit of the Spirit. We don't want to be impulsive in when we act. We want to think things through. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 5 says, therefore, do not go on passing judgment before the time, but wait until the Lord comes, who will bring both to light the things hidden in the darkness and disclose the motives of men's hearts. So how do we line that up? Well, it's quite simple. We don't move ahead of the Lord, but when God gives the instruction to go, we go. Okay? What was the Great Commission? It starts off by saying what? Go and make disciples of all men. Once we receive our commission from the Lord, then we don't hesitate. So there's the difference between going in our own strength and our own wisdom and going in the Lord's strength and in his commission. And Jehu had a commission. We see a modern equivalent of Jehu today. Jonathan Cahn, in his tremendous book, The Paradigm, makes the comparison between Jehu and Donald Trump. And we see the parallels. And if you haven't read the book, it's just an absolutely fantastic book where he makes the parallels between Ahab and Jezebel and Bill and Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump and then Jehu. And so Donald Trump is really God's battering ram to deal with the deep state. And this whole fight that he's had all along in the past 3 years of his presidency in order to fight against this this wall of evil that has been put up in the United States, preventing revival from happening. And so through the impulsiveness of Donald Trump, we see that he's a little unpredictable. Jehu was unpredictable. And unpredictable people are very, very scary to fight. Because when you are, and when I used to spar, what you would always want to do is you wanted to study your opponent to see if you could start predicting how they were going to respond. In sports today, for instance, if in hockey, they have videos and they'll have coaches who are specifically designated to watch the videos of the different teams, the opponents, in order that they may predict, well, which side is the goalie weakest on? Is it glove side? Is he weak through the 5-hole? And so if you can kind of guess, or if you can kind of evaluate and see his weaknesses, well, then you have a much better chance of scoring. But when you have someone who's unpredictable, someone who is, again, back when I used to spar, and I'd get in the ring with someone and someone who was kind of flailing all over the place, you never know what you're going to get hit with. And Jehu is kind of like that. Donald Trump is very much like that. We don't know when he's all of a sudden going to snap off and he's going to go do something. Now, Donald Trump's no dummy, and we see him being very calculated in what he does. But one thing Donald Trump is very well known for, and this is what makes his enemies crazy, is that he is accustomed to making snap decisions. He thinks things through very quickly. He comes to a decision, then he acts on it. And this is why God chose Jehu. Because even though Jehu was impulsive, even though Jehu was self-centered, even though Jehu was all kinds of, why would God choose Donald Trump? I mean, he's got a history of adultery and this and that and the other thing. Well, I mean, when you really think about it, does God ever choose perfect men to do anything? Well, he can't, because there are none. There was only one throughout history, and he was chosen for a specific assignment, which was to defeat death, to defeat the enemy at the cross, and at the resurrection. Yeshua was the only perfect man through history. So, you remember when the woman was caught in adultery, what did Yeshua say? He who is without sin cast the first stone. So we wouldn't necessarily choose Donald Trump to be a role model per se of how you want to be in society. the kind of person that you want to be known for. But at the same time, we're also looking at him, number one, in the past. And yes, he did cheat on his first wife. And yes, he did probably cheat on his second wife, or the divorce. I don't know what happened there. But the thing is that was then, this is now. But the other thing is that there is no president in history that has been more prophesied and prayed over than Donald Trump. We don't know where he's at spiritually. I know he's a lot further along in him coming to faith than he ever was before. I mean, at least there's a possibility of it. But the other thing is that God chooses imperfect people all the time in order to get his stuff done. What I shared at this breakfast meeting that I was at the other day is one of the things that I am most grateful for, and I have said this many times over, that God has already factored our stupidity, our sin, our rebellion, our imperfection into the outcome. So ultimately, we can't screw it up for God because he already knows what we're going to do and the dumb decisions we're going to make. Thank you, Lord. Very appreciative of that. God is not taken off guard. God is not caught by surprise. And so he knew full well what he was doing when he picked Donald Trump to be the president, and he knew full well what he was doing when he picked Jehu to be his emissary to kill the spirit of Jezebel within Israel. We got to be very careful about casting judgment upon who God picks. God has his reason, and his reasons are sometimes not so obvious. But one thing that God is going to do is he's going to pick the ideal person to get the job done, despite all of their foibles and fallacies. Okay? He was fearless, and fearlessness was what was needed to overthrow Jezebel. He was a guy of action. Anybody remember Larry the Cable Guy? What was he most famous for saying? Get her done! And that's what Jehu was. He was a guy who was going to get her done. He was going to go out there, and he ran roughshod over both kings, about Jezebel, about the line of Ahab, and he took care of all this within a very short period of time. He had the ability to think fast. He had the ability to make decisions. And because he had the favor of God, he had the anointing of God in order to get her done. And fearlessness is what was needed in order to overthrow Jezebel. Again, Jezebel, the spirit of Jezebel uses fear in order to incapacitate the people that they're trying to destroy. And fearlessness is what's needed. Be anxious for nothing. Do not fear. It said over and over, perfect love casts out fear. Let's have a look at what he did to defeat Jezebel. So first of all, he had to take out her son because he was the political power. Ahaziah was the king of Judah, but also a descendant of Ahab, so he had to go, and God supernaturally lined it up so that he was there. But if we look here, that in 2 Kings chapter 9, verse 30, now when Jehu had come to Jezreel, Jezebel heard of it, and she put paint on her eyes and adorned her head, and she looked through a window. Then, as Jehu entered at the gate, she said, "Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" Now, what is Jezebel doing? Well, number one of the techniques that the spirit of Jezebel uses is seduction. Jezebel's not a young woman anymore. She is not I don't know what she looked like, but chances are there was a sexual energy about her that enabled her to bewitch a whole bunch of men. And bewitch is the literal term that we should be using because there's witchcraft involved. Sexual immorality is very prominent within occultism. As a matter of fact, the mass epidemic you see of pedophilia in the world today is because that those who practice such things get demonic power and energy from their victims. It is called sexual vampirism. The epidemic of pedophilia within the Catholic Church is not just because all of the priests can't marry, and so they've got to have an outlet somewhere. It is because that within the high level, and I'm not saying all Catholics are like this, but I'm saying within the Catholic system, within the Vatican, that there is witchcraft, there is paganism, there is occultism. And, well, the Pachamama is just, I mean, I'm mystified as to why the Catholics are so upset about this idol that they used to bow down to at the Amazon Synod a couple of months ago, because the Catholic Church is full of idols. They pray to Mary, they pray to the saints, they invoke, pray to Saint this, Saint that, the other thing. Well, what about praying to Jesus? Okay, but I mean, that's neither here nor there. But the thing is that within the Catholic Church, because at the high levels you've got witchcraft, they get energy from sexual immorality. They get power from it. It's not as if they all need an outlet per se. It's that it's very intentional that they're drawing the sexual energy off of their victims. The younger the victim, the more innocent, the more pure, the more energy they get. We got to understand what it is that we're dealing with. I mean, it's sick to think about, and a lot of people don't want to think about it, but that is the reality. That's what we're dealing with. And so there is this sexual energy, but Jezebel isn't a young woman anymore. And yet she sees the murderer of her son coming to her, and what's she going to try to do? She's going to pull out the same bullets that are in the gun, and she's going to try to seduce him. And then what does she do? So she paints her face up. She puts on her crown as if she still has authority, even though she wasn't the queen anymore. She was kind of the power in the background. She guided her son just as she guided his father. She was the one who influenced the direction that they should go, because both Ahab and Jehoram equivocated. They weren't strong men. They didn't put a stop to what Jezebel did, and in fact, they helped her carry out her plans. And so she says, "Is it peace, Zimri, murder of your master?" What's she doing? Why would she say Zimri? Well, who is Zimri? Well, Zimri actually was a general. So if you go back a few chapters, Zimri was one of the generals who overthrew the current king of Israel, and he killed him, took the throne. But Omri, who was Jezebel's father-in-law, so there ended up being a battle between them. So Zimri kills the current king, takes the throne for himself, but the majority of people ended up choosing Omri instead. And it says that Omri went to do battle with Zimri, and Zimri lasted on the throne 1 whole week, and then he committed suicide, and Omri took the throne. So what's she doing? She is mocking him and saying, "Oh, you killed your master just like Zimri did? Well, then you're going to die just like he did." So she was again choosing the technique of fear, seduction, getting yourself all dolled up, and then fear in order to try to mock him and to emasculate him. How does Jehu respond? Well, first of all, he's not seduced by her at all. And he looked up at the window and said, "Who is on my side?" "Yeah, whatever, you keep talking there, woman." "Who?" And 2 or 3 eunuchs looked down at him. Then he said, "Throw her down." So they threw her down, and the blood spattered on the wall and the horses, and he trampled her underfoot. So he doesn't fall for her seductions. He's not even fazed by her mockery. Some people get all wounded when they get mocked. They're called a name and they want to curl up in a ball. And when you've got the spirit of Jezebel, who you know is a powerful spirit, is going like boom, like this, and it's like, "I'm going to kill you. I'm going to take you out." That's what she said to Elijah. That's what caused him to run. "You just killed all of my prophets, but I'm the power behind them. And if by this time tomorrow you're not like one of them," and he's like, "I got to get out of here. I got to run for my life." Jehu? Yeah, whatever. You keep talking, woman. I'm not interested. Who's on my side? They throw her down. He walks over her. I mean, he's a general. He's seen war. So blood isn't, doesn't fit. But he literally tramples over her, goes in and sits down and has dinner. I mean, my goodness. If you can see that kind of blood and you go in and you have a meal, you're a hard person, man. But that's what God needs. He needs a battering ram. He needs someone who is unfazed by these things. And then he says, well, okay. He kind of thinks about it and he says, go in and see to this accursed woman, bury her, for she was a king's daughter. Well, we have to give her some sort of honor even in death, even though she was wicked and everything else. And so they went to bury her, but they found no more of her than the skull and the feet and the palms of her hands. And therefore they came back and told him, and he said, this is the word of the Lord that he spoke by his servant Elijah the Tishbite, saying, on the plot of ground at Jezreel, dogs shall eat the flesh of Jezebel, and the corpse of Jezebel shall be as refuse on the surface of the field in the plot of Jezreel, so that they shall not say, here lies Jezebel. So in other words, God prophesied that Jezebel was going to be eaten by the dogs, so they couldn't bury her and set up a shrine saying, here is Jezebel, and go worship at it. Because that's what they would have done. She would have been a martyr. She was eaten by dogs, which was about the greatest disgrace that one could experience in death. And what I want to end with here is who ended up executing Jezebel? It was the eunuchs. It was the men who had been incapacitated, that when God raises up a Jehu, he inspired the eunuchs, the men who were incapacitated by her witchcraft, her sorceries, her seductions, her rebellion. Jehu inspired the eunuchs to regain their manhood and toss her down. He didn't even have to do it. He didn't have to do it. It was the men who he inspired to do it. And so the lesson that we have to learn in all of this is that when God raises up the spirit of Jehu in society, men who were once emasculated, men who were once incapacitated because of this powerful spirit, will rise up to the occasion and to take back their rightful roles as protectors of society. I think this is such a beautiful picture that Jehu, the battering ram, the Donald Trump of yesteryear, who was unfazed. I mean, when you think about what Donald Trump has to deal with and whether you voted for him or not, whether you're in favor of him or not, you have to admire his resilience and the fact that he has got so many people in so many high places who are trying to take him out, assassination attempts. He's now got an $80 million price on his head. He has people who are betraying him. He goes from the Oval Office to the West Wing, and he has no idea who's in his court on a day-to-day basis. He doesn't know who he can trust. And yet, day after day after day, he still continues to do what he is doing. That, to me, is remarkable. And what he is doing is he is giving hope to all the men who've been emasculated by the Hillary Clintons of this world, of the Jezebels of this world, over the Elizabeth Warrens of this world, or even the younger generation of the Alexandria Ocasio-Cortezes of this world, who are part of the squad. All of them women. Have you noticed that? Ilhan Omar, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, they're all possessed with the Jezebel spirit, undermining authority and and Donald Trump doesn't care. He mocks them. He goes on his Twitter account and he mocks them. The spirit of Jehu has risen up in that man, and he is inspiring the eunuchs, the men who have been terrified to confront this, to take their rightful role and to throw Jezebel down. Because what Jezebel turned out to be was nothing more than a human being. Yes, there was a powerful spirit who was inspiring her. Yes, she had supernatural ability in order to put fear and despair into the hearts of men. They were emasculated. They were eunuchs spiritually. But Jehu inspired them to take the rightful role, and it was those men who threw Jezebel over and killed her. And so what God wants to do is he wants to raise up the spirit of Jehu in society today and say, Jezebel has had enough. Enough with her harlotries, enough with her witchcraft, enough with her idolatry, enough with the emasculating of men, the destroying of families, and doing everything that is ungodly. And we are going to come back to righteousness. This is encouraging for all men who have the spirit of fear. Take heart, because God is raising up Jehus in society today. The spirit of Jehu is on the rise. It's not perfect, and we're not going to judge those. But what we are going to do is we're going to follow Jehu into battle. And when Jehu says, who is on my side, because he was on the Lord's side, God is going to honor that, and we are going to be able to overthrow the spirit of Jezebel. And so next week, as we wrap up this series, we're going to be discussing how the men can do that. We're going to take some practical steps, because the word of God is meaningless unless it can actually impact you on how to live your life on a day-to-day basis. We are going to discuss what men can do practically in order to see if they perhaps are the Jehus of this world, or at least they're going to follow the Jehus of this world and to be able to identify that. I am so excited about what God is doing, and I believe 2020 is a year we're going to see a reversal of the spirit of Jezebel in society today. Father, in the name of Yeshua, we give you thanks and praise and glory and honor for this. Lord, you are raising up a Jehu in our midst today. You are raising up warrior kings so that we may confront and overthrow the spirit of Jezebel. And Father, we are praying right now in Yeshua's mighty name that we would have the authority to overthrow these wicked spirits, Lord, and that we would take our rightful place as defenders of society, Father, to bring back righteousness and to destroy paganism in our midst. Father, the churches have been filled with emasculated men for too long, and we are now raising up the banner of Jehu and saying, who is on my side? Who? And all it took was 2 or 3 eunuchs, men who found their virility once again, because Jehu inspired them. Father, inspire the men today to become men, protectors, providers, and priests of their home. We lift all these things up in Yeshua's mighty name. Amen.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hoogie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.